Pheṇūpamaṃ, kāyamimaṃ viditvā. Marīcidhammaṃ, abhisambudhāno. Chetvāna, mārassa, papupphakāni. Adassanaṃ, maccurājassa, gacche. Okay, we are going to go ahead and give a little rough translation here. Then we will talk about the meanings of the words and the forms. I would ideally like to separate those two, or I would like to separate those into different parts of the video, but I find that goal to be unattainable. So I apologize for that, dear listener. Having known this body to be like foam, realizing it to be of the nature of a mirage, to be mirage-like, maybe, having cut out Mara's flower-tipped, we might say arrows, but we'll leave it at that for now. And our final line here, one would go to the place unseen by the King of Death. Okay, so let's kind of unpack this. We'll go line by line. One thing up front, I want to say that this verse connects with verse 170 in Dhammapada. Daily Pali Reading has an episode on that already, and I won't say a whole lot more about it, except that it is it's worthwhile to read that verse as well. And I will talk just a little bit about it in a second. Also, if you were to see the Anicca Suttāṃ, also I will link to this series Daily Pali Reading did. This is a very poetic, beautiful, imagery-filled way of giving us of presenting the teaching found in Anicca Suttāṃ, which is more of a technical, like philosophical text. It was still very beautiful, and but not really filled with imagery like this is. I don't know why I can't really speak today, and apologies for any sniffling. So, probably best to start with our verbs, and I don't know, let's make verbs red or something, or verbs and participles are going to get colored red here. We have viditvā. Now, this comes from the verb venditi, to know. You can compare the word, I said vidjati, but really what I wanted to write was the word vidya. The word knowledge comes from, it may seem like it's a little unrelated. It's coming from like the passive form of the verb, but the obviously a word like knowledge being connected to the verb to know, that's not a big stretch. So viditvā, and one other thing, it's definitely related to, say, the Latin word video, or our word video. Video in Latin meaning to see, and even in Greek, like oida, having seen meaning to know. So you could think of it that way. But the verb venditi meaning to know, viditvā, having known. And keep in mind, now this is what's called an absolutive form. This is the way Pali expresses a sequence of verbs. They don't just chain together what we might call, or what are called, finite forms of verbs. They say something like this: having seen, having understood, having cut away. It would be like in English saying having gone to the gas station, having gone to the store, having picked up my friend, we came home for dinner, or something like that. You would only get one finite verb, and that would be at the end. So having known, it seems a little wooden, but that's what we're going to go with here. Having known, and then there's an object here. Should also say the absolutive form doesn't change. This could be, singular or plural, any person. It doesn't matter. So, and we don't know that going in order. We only know that it's an absolutive. So it has an object, kāyamimaṃ. Now, this is an example that when you look at this, it might look like a real long word, or it's really just this, kāyang, body, and in the accusative here, and imaṃ, demonstrative pronoun in the accusative. But when they get run together, kāyamimaṃ, it just means this body. Knowing this body, or having known this body, and we'll probably have to stick in some form of the verb to be, and I'm going to keep it like an infinitive here. Having known this body to be, and then Pheṇūpamaṃ. So this breaks apart into pena and upama, and actually upamaṃ. This is an adjective, so it's agreeing with kāyam, or kāyang, I should say. So knowing this body to be like pena, like scum, foam, or froth, like soap scum or something. That word scum might kind of seem negative. I don't think it's unjustified to understand the body in a sort of dirty sense, that the body is not without some unclean aspects, right? So I think that this image is good. I settled on foam. Foam doesn't have to have like a negative, unclean image, but and I don't know that the main meaning is one that we should understand as kind of being dirty. I don't think that's the idea. I think that the idea is foam is that it's impermanent. And that's the main idea of this first line, is that the body is impermanent. And that is talked about in anicca suttaṃ rūpaṃ aniccaṃ. There it's a different word. Rūpaṃ meaning like body, or also like form. Sometimes you'll hear form. So this is really expressing that idea that the body is impermanent, using this image of like foam or froth, because we know little bubbles, they come into existence, and they pop, and that is kind of the nature of our body. We were babies once. We age. Our body is not staying the same. Hair colors change. Things, the body undergoes change constantly. And so that is what this line is about. It's the impermanence of the body. This word upama, it comes up like in opamaṃ, the word simile. I came across that, I think, first in Melinda Pano, and it comes up quite a bit there, where the king is asking Nagasena to make a simile. Opamaṃ karohi, or karohi, sorry about that. So anyway, just to point out that this is not completely unrelated there. Okay, so let's go to this next line, abhisambudhāno. Now this is actually a past participle. I didn't write that down. And here we would know this is really pointing out the subject here. This is like a singular, nominative singular, masculine nominative singular. So a person realizing that, or just realizing it, or we could supply it, realizing this body is Marīcidhammaṃ. Now, Marīcidhammaṃ is Marīci and Dhammam put together in a compound. This is a tapurisa compound. If these were broken apart and not in a compound, I think we would see, let's see here. It would look like Marīcidhammaṃ. In other words, this would be, note that the genitive case, genitive singular. So this word Dhammam, Dharma, has many, many meanings. But as the second member of a compound, or I should say the last member of a compound, it tends to mean nature, having the quality of, having the nature of, and then having the nature of Marīci, a ray of light, a mirage. So realizing that the body is like a ray of light, that it's mirage, it's not real. We should think about this in a deep way for a minute and really let this image sink in. Because if we think about a mirage or even a ray of light and mirages do exist, but they are still illusory. Now, a ray of light has a different, I should say, like, if we're thinking about like light shimmering on water or something, in Thai they say yip yap, yip yap. It exists, but it's not something that you can really grasp. And just the same could be said of a mirage. If we think about our bodies that way, what the Buddha is saying is that they are not possessed of an abiding self. So that would tie, if we're thinking about anicca suttang again, this would tie into anatta, that the body is not the self. It is not Atman. It is not this stable, eternal entity. So when we talk about the illusory quality of the body, if we think about a mirage, mirages do exist, but they are still illusory. They don't have this substance to them. And that is what the Buddha is telling us about the body. And also something about the body that we have to realize in order for something to happen here at the end of this verse. So, going on, Chetvāna. Now, this is another absolutive, and I don't think it's absolutive form. It's a longer form. You could just find Chetvā. Chetvāna has no difference in meaning, and it may simply, and I would imagine it's used for the metrical purposes. So chindati is to cut, remove, destroy, to cut out. And then we have mārassa. Now this came up because I'm doing some of these verses not really in sequential order. In chapter 3 on the chitta vago, the chapter of the Dhammapada on the mind, I believe is where Mara came up, and I translated it as death. And I think that you can understand Mara as death, but I think it's better to think of Mara as the personification of the forces which keep us bound to samsara, keep us born, or keep us in the cycle of rebirth. So it's, like a demon, an evil one. Warder says the devil, something like that. But evil in the sense of keeping us here in the realm of samsara, in this three-leveled world of like form, or of desire form in the formless realms. Now, this one here, papupphakāni. This is really a compound too. This pa means pro, meaning like forward or maybe in front. Papupphakāni is really like I would think like an adjective from pupa, from like flower. So kind of a forward with flowers in front, I think is how the Pali English Dictionary said it, or flower tipped, with flowers in front. You can see that this is an object here. I should have said that about Marīcidhammaṃ. This is the object of abhisambudhāno. And papupphakāni is the object of Chetvāna. In other words, papupphakāni this is our neuter accusative plural. So if we're thinking about like a flower-tipped arrow or something like that, I think this idea comes from the Buddha often talks about how sense pleasures often conceal a barb or a snare of some sort. They seem beautiful, but once you kind of get entangled, it's difficult to get out, right? There's something there to snare you, or there's something there like an arrow. It's actually, it's dangerous. It's, it causes harm. That's another way to think about that image. So here, one who's on the path to liberation has cut themselves free from that. They've cut out. They've done away with these flower-tipped. There's a really good, I think it's in Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha talks about anger as being something that is intoxicating, but like is poisonous, So another example of that where it's not even an object, but, could be just a feeling. Okay, so we have these three, ideas here, these three actions, we might say. And then this fourth line is sort of, I would say, because of this verb, I would say it's sort of like a condition. The Buddha is telling us something that would happen or will happen if these things obtain, it's like if you're following this recipe, this would happen. If you were to, mix sugar with butter, you would be able to make, some kind of icing or something like that. So I think that's what's being said here. So gacche, our verb, is the short optative form of gacchati, to go. One would go. So these three things having happened, one would go. And then we have to remember that the object of motion in Pali is expressed in the accusative. One would go Adassanaṃ. This word Adassanaṃ means unseen or invisible. And it comes from this hypothetical present tense. And when it's hypothetical, it should have that little asterisk, dassity. Dassity means to see, or it would mean in the present tense. We get passaddhi in the present tense in Pali. But you do see this in other forms, like, for instance, this one. And in the Anicca Suttāṃ, I believe it's dattabhaṃ, one should see. It's the future passive participle there. And also this word ditti, like a viewpoint, as in samaditi, right view. So, but what's a little strange about it is one would go to the invisible. And I think what we have to understand is place. This is being used as an adjective, place, or even say realm or like lokang. We don't really want to use that word, but I'm just kind of using that as a placeholder. The commentary clarifies this and just equates it with nibbānaṃ. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So to the place that's invisible, unseen, and by, I'm saying unseen by, and I'm going to make this more clear in a minute. So then we have maccurājassa. Now this is a compound of maccu and raja. And here in the raja is rajasa. This is the genitive singular. Raja is king. Of the king, maccu, and this would really be maccuno, the king of death. The way I've translated it here, you might think that we would expect to see an instrumental case, and I forget the actual section in Du Roy-Cell. I'll put that up. It might be 596. I just looked at it last night. So one thing about the genitive is it is sometimes used when you would expect an ablative, or in this case, an instrumental. I'll put that quote up. And so I think that we can still understand this like kind of in an instrumental way, or to the unseen of, of the king of death. Sometimes I think this is, you'll hear this as one would go beyond the sight of the king of death. But really we're talking about going to a place, even though it's not a place, and daily Pali reading has quite I don't know how many, but there's also a playlist on nirvana, which comes from the Udana. So basically, if we want to break this down, when these three conditions obtain, one would go to complete liberation. One would be liberated. Now, I think we said up here, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in on Nichang. This is an ta. And here, I think this is really expressing the idea of dukkha. So the point here is that these three ideas of impermanence, of dukkha, and of not the self, when someone has really experienced this, not just thought about it, when someone has experienced this, they will reach nirvana. And one kind of last thing that I would point out is that the Buddha is fairly silent about the content of that experience. We can make guesses as to kind of what awaits us there. Is it Satchit Ananda? Is it like bliss? I would hazard a guess to say that it is bliss, that it's very blissful, and that there's probably a breakdown of duality, right? That there's an experience of a oneness. But, using words like that, they can also become impediments, and I think that's why the Buddha is famously silent on this. He's kind of apophatic, if you want to use that word. But the thing about that is the Buddha does not portray the spiritual path as understanding these three qualities and then despairing. I think that's something that happened, that's happened in the West, that people think like, yeah, the body is impermanent and there is suffering and there's no abiding self and all is, darkness and sadness and meaningless. But that is not the Buddha's conclusion, because it's not a logical conclusion. This is something that we have to experience. And that is why when we take steps on the Buddhist path, we always want to kind of practice things like loving kindness that help us overcome our real little sense of ego. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say there, but I think I've probably said more than enough. And I am always interested in what you have to say, dear listener. Peace.